Hello, dear listeners of the Mad Scientist Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cogswell, with my co-host, Marie Mayhew.
What's going on? What's the story?
Oh,
what are we up to?
Doing so good, Marie. So actually, this episode, listeners, we're redoing the very first episode of this show. Because
we've run out of things to talk about.
Sorry for the clip show.
Yeah. Greatest hits.
Next season, Chris and Marie become robots. We go back in time. We're gonna have celebrity appearances.
Pirates.
I find out I've got a son from Azerbaijan who comes over to kind of spice things up. He's cute. You're gonna love him.
And then they turn out to be aliens.
Right, and then it was all a dream.
It was all a dream. Yes, they're actually dead.
This episode really is kind of the crux question of the whole show. Like why we do the show, why I started the podcast, and then why I eventually asked Marie to come on, and why I got involved with other podcasts. And like, I'm sure, Marie, the same reason you got involved with Astonishing Legends.
Yep.
And we met in New York. Like, it's this question ultimately of what do you do with paranormal beliefs in the 21st century?
Yeah.
Well, what do you do with them? Do they have any place here? And so that's basically what we're going to get into this episode. So Jake, roll the tape. So Marie.
Yes. Chris, I'm on it. I'm ready.
We're so ready. So
ready.
The first, recently with the UFO stuff and everything else, and even if with my own work with like groups like Sky Hub or just like talking to people that are interested in this stuff, I've really asked myself this question an awful lot recently. I feel like is it ethical to let someone believe something that isn't true? Or like, is it ethical to
straight in for it?
I think it's a really
softball question, man.
We're starting softball. I think it's a really important question because especially like in an age where this is the first time I think in a lot of people's lives where other people's beliefs have negatively impacted them in either direction, really.
Yes. Agree. Yes.
And it's because of COVID, but really other people.
It's because of a lot of things.
It is. It's because of a lot of things, but I think COVID is kind of the main viewpoint here, right? Regardless of if you think vaccines are real or not, or masks are real or not, or whatever, which this show endorses the view, of course, held by science that they are real. Vaccines are
both of them are,
and masks are important. So please wear them. I think there's if you don't believe masks are real, then this is the government overreaching or if not that you don't think masks are real, but the need to wear masks is real or whatever, then this is government overreaching. And it's like an actual act of like, visible tyranny, I guess, for you.
Yes.
But on the other side of the spectrum, if you live in a state where people are allowed to not wear masks or whatever, you're probably worried about your health or the health of your loved ones. So,
right. And the fact that you're surrounded by people that are science deniers. Yeah.
And so
which would be my biggest concern.
Well, and it brings a larger question then of like, at what point do other people's beliefs become not okay? And I think it's actually part of like a larger question here on conspiracy theories generally. Like we posted a thing on Twitter the other day and I said something to the effect of, some of these beliefs are dangerous or can become dangerous. And Scott actually from Astonishing Legends posted and said, the beliefs aren't dangerous or beliefs aren't dangerous. And I replied and said, basically, they're not dangerous until someone makes you use them for something, right? Or you act on them.
Yeah, it's sort of like that old adage, and I don't know, people like have said, I don't know where it originally was coined, but it's like, I have the right to wave my fist in the air as much as I want until it hits you in the nose.
Yeah, it's the idea of it's like from, I think it comes from the argument, or at least the time that I've read it, it's from the argument about like positive versus negative rights. So like I have the right to buy land, but but I also have the right for you not to hit me. Does that make sense? So I have rights that stop other people. I have rights that stop other people from doing things.
Right. And
so as a society, we all have that right so that people don't do things, but we also have rights that like confer to us something. Right. So I have the right to like, again, like I have the right maybe in our society today to like Social Security, let's say, or whatever.
Yes.
But I don't have the right to like,
hit you in the nose.
Hit you in the nose. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I don't know. To me, it's like the we keep saying hit you in the nose. It's sort of like it's the thought experiment or the ethics argument, right? Which is, again, like I have the right to do whatever I want with my space and my body, and my free will until it impacts someone else.
Yeah.
And that's when there's a problem. And I would argue, beliefs, like anything, can be weaponized. If I believe something strongly enough, and I am the move from believing to acting, right? I believe something quietly in my own home for a number of years, and then I leave my home with a gun and decide to shoot some public figure, right? That hair's breadth between those two things is what the issue is. It's like that didn't turn on a dime. That clearly that belief has been activated into something else besides a belief.
Right. But I think that's the problem though, right? Is like, okay, the guy who's, if you know some, like it brings up all kinds of really hard questions, right? Like first off, can you ever predict, or can you ever say for certain that, like, let's take racism, right? Somebody is part of like a racist skinhead group, whatever. They play in a skinhead band. They're, all that other stuff. Do you, or does the government have a responsibility, or does society, does their family, does whatever have a responsibility to try to sway that person's views?
I would say that the government, the people, everyone around them has a responsibility to understand where those views came from and how it got to be that.
See, but
that's to me is like, well, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, but that assumes that their beliefs are not true, right? That assumes that the beliefs are not true, but then is truth is truth a good?
Subjective.
Right. Well, or is truth a thing anyways? Yeah. Thing.
Well, I mean, again, like if you're talking about, dude, this one's tricky. I would say like, okay, if you want to use sort of an example to me that would be, skinhead. The skinhead example is pretty. It's
an extreme one.
Let's look at somebody who is, who lives in a war-torn state, right? A war-torn country. They've seen their neighborhood demolished. They've seen their family killed. And the people that are doing it are their neighbors, or are their, the neighboring country. How do you not, it's easy to take that belief, or start to take the belief that person who's seeing all that can be weaponized, can be
if that person turns to terrorism,
right?
Is it because of is it the fault of the person who initially perpetrated the trauma on the person? Is it the fault of the person who weaponizes them, or is the weaponization is the weaponization totally fine, right? Like, let's imagine you have like a galactic empire, and then there's a faction of like dissidents on a planet called like Alderaan, right? Like,
oh snap! Look at this, you guys.
Is it okay?
Y'all tune back in.
But really though, there's like a fine line there, and so I think as you edge towards the more extreme views, right? Stuff like like the way that I always kind of try to view it is like, or is the person a danger to themselves or others? But like that is in itself a very like paternalistic or like nanny state-ish view. Like, the vast majority of like people who believe that the government, the vast majority of people who believe the government is a threat or there's a deep state or whatever, the vast majority of those people don't like go on a rampage and blow up a government building. No. But some of them do. And so is there a responsibility, or is there a law enforcement imperative or a need to control those arguments? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, or are we getting too close to censorship? And then the question becomes, well, who gets to decide what is a good or not thought? Like, because again, the difference between a terrorist and a freedom fighter is pretty thin.
Yes. And I don't think you can, I don't know. I don't think you can hide behind First Amendment necessarily without some type of responsibility. I do think that there's, again, like, what is the social norm, or the dictate is that you can't take actions that are going to negatively impact other people's lives.
See, but that's I honestly, I can't believe that I would ever make this argument or even have these thoughts, frankly, because I think when I was like, I generally view myself as being very anti-censorship, but like, for example, if like obviously saying you should kill X person, that shouldn't be allowed. Right? It's like a directed action. It's like trying to get someone hurt. So I think that's probably not a good thing to say. Yelling fire in a crowded theater is another case where it's like, you can expect there to be harm to people based on your words. So you shouldn't say it. And so there should be a legal protection against it.
Right.
But what about emotional pain? Like what about like trauma, or what about, again, that deeper cascade of Alex Jones goes on his radio show.
Yeah. And says that the Sandy Hook is
Sandy Hook is a false flag. And then people send death threats to the family of Sandy Hook victims.
Well, I think that he's responsible. I am like, I would like to think I'm anti-censorship in the regard that, that the government does not necessarily have the right to censor the media or censor certain publications. However, I think that if Alex Jones is spouting something that is inflammatory and that is libel and is patently false and inciting people to take an action, whether it's almost like by proxy, then he should have to pay some. He either should be held up in court, or he should be there should be some sort of recompense for it, right? Because that's what it is. It's basically by proxy. You're not inciting them directly. You're not saying go kill them, but you are arming them, and you're lighting the fuse and putting enough kindling under it to set it on fire.
Well, let's take a more nuanced example then, or maybe a less extreme example then. What if, so you are a member of a cult.
Sweet.
And you have given all of your money to the cult leader. And then, you get disillusioned, you leave the cult. Now you want to sue the cult leader for damages.
Yes.
But you believe the cult leader. Right? Like you made the choice. Like the cult leader didn't force you to join the cult.
No. I would still argue that that if it's a cult, they are going to take certain actions that are going to systematically deprive you of making best decisions for yourself.
So it's not a cult, it's a religion.
It's a religion. I give them all my money and then I'm disillusioned.
And you want it back.
And I want it back.
You basically say like, look, I went to this mega church. They made me, they made me believe in snake handling or whatever, right? Some small sect of Christianity. Yes. It's protected and whatever. Like the religious figure has protected speech. So is paranormal speech religious speech?
So, the thing being is I was not put under a level of duress to reach that belief. I voluntarily entered into that belief.
Okay, so for you, it's like
they weren't depriving me of sleep. They weren't cutting me off from my community. They weren't, So
it's like so it's the level. It's like the level of coercion.
Drugs.
Yeah, it's the level of coercion. Yeah.
There has to be some especially with cults. There is some level of physical and emotional coercion to get to that level of susceptibility, right? Sure. That you are buying in. I would say religion again. I'm going to put out there that arguable, but there is not, you enter into a religious faith based on a voluntary action to a degree, right? I mean,
yeah, it gets really complicated. Like it's really easy to make these arguments when like, it's clearly not true. If I told you I have a mansion I can sell you for $1 million and you just have to trust me and then you give me $1 million, like you're an idiot, but I still I still defrauded you. Right.
Well, you defrauded me.
I think,
yes.
but that's the thing with the paranormal. I think a lot of the times people think, well, these people are just idiots, right? Like
there's a sucker born every minute.
Right. Yeah. They were defrauded because they weren't smart, but it kind of feels like, blaming the victim of something like, they're not dumb.
No.
People go to these things. Like, again, I think there is like a level of coercion there, right. But I don't know, man.
But if you enter into something into good faith, I mean, you're not stupid for having good faith. That is that's sort of the operating system that I'm going to say that part of America is based on, right? Like we want to go into things believing that, but what we're going into has some level of like no bias or no ill intent or no whatever. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, so I think if you go in and you're like, again, like a sucker's born every moment and a fool and his money are soon parted. So it's like you have personal responsibility to understand what you're entering into, but you also have the ability to want to enter into it voluntarily.
Yeah. Well,
right. You have to have both. You have to have both.
Right. But again, I think again, though, it opens up the question of, okay, so you have to enter voluntarily. You have to have good faith, right? Mm-hmm. That's on the part of the receiver or maybe the dupee, let's say, or whatever. But, but what if the duper really does believe? So what if the guy leading the cult really does believe God is telling him to do these things?
Right.
Then who the hell do you blame?
Well, but you still blame. Okay, so with the cult, you still again like you are going to with the cult, you go through certain steps that decrease your
not cult. Likelihood. Yeah, let's get rid of cult. Right. Let's say again a new religious movement. Right. So it's not even a cult. It's just a new religion. Right. So this guy, this lady thinks that the goddess is speaking to her.
Yeah. Okay,
the goddess is speaking to her, says, listen, you need money. People need to be in poverty. Mm-hmm. So what you need to do is you need to get followers. You get their money. You build temples in my name. Right. The person really believes it, that's true.
Well, that's the truth.
And
if other people buy into their truth, then that's that's what that is, right? I mean, like, I can't say that other people's religious beliefs are coerced or are, I don't want to say bad, but, I can't say that I can't cast a judgment on them. And I don't think that's what you're doing either. But I think that that's like, my thing is like, if you choose to believe, I do not. And if you try to prompt me, I will be vocal in why I don't agree with that. I'm not going to give you money. I'm not going to, right? But if you choose to do that with your money, that is your choice because of your belief. If that church ultimately gets big enough that it starts to, deny people civil rights, yada, 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 like it becomes to take an action beyond a religious faith, then that is when, again, that's when that becomes a problem. Does that happen with all huge religions? Well, you and I would probably say yes, right? Yes, it does. It becomes a mechanism in which it financially defrauds people and impoverishes them in a number of different emotional ways. But I don't, that's a harder, like you said, that's a murkier argument.
Yeah. I mean, so listeners, why are we bringing all these things up?
It's a good question. Because
a lot of those same arguments can be applied to paranormal belief, so if you are making a TV show or you're selling money to go on a ghost tour, right? I think that's a level of like people, it's good faith, right? People don't really, maybe they believe in ghosts, maybe they don't. They think it'll be fun. You're providing a service. It's a good time. But I think
it's fun.
But I think a lot of us would think that that's different. It's very different than charging people money to come hear you speak about your new religion or your communication with the aliens or, people paying you to come and exorcise demons from their children. Right.
Yeah.
That is different in some important way. But the issue or the challenge then becomes, well, if this is something bad that harms people, first off, we have to get over that. Do we think this actually harms people? I don't know. I kind of think it does because I've had people in my own life be harmed by it. But at the same time, maybe, again, a sucker is born every minute. Maybe it's just a part of life. You can't protect people from having incorrect thoughts. But so then it becomes a question of, well, if you can't protect people from incorrect thoughts, or if we don't think it's important to correct people about incorrect thoughts or teach them better or provide them with better education, then what do you do? Right? Like is there even a moral reason for skepticism then? Is there a moral imperative for going out and being skeptical? Like I think there probably is to some extent, but I think most skeptics though, and especially the skeptics that people think would consider to be debunkers or whatever, they're not doing it because they just like debunking things. I think at the core of it, they're doing it because they think they're protecting people.
Well, I think that so here's a relatively extreme example, but you have someone who is very much into conspiracy theories, so much into conspiracy theories that they buy into QAnon, right? So what is your responsibility to a family member or to someone who's a friend if you are skeptical of that, right? Like so I would say yes, you have a ethical obligation in my way, or in my opinion, to say, to try and broach that subject and find out why does that person believe in that? What was the thing that made them believe it? And then how do you and this is sort of a question that I think a lot of people are asking is like, how do you break that cycle?
See, but already though, in that argument, we've assumed that QAnon is a bad idea.
Yes,
that it's a bad thought to have. But I don't think QAnon is much different. Like it is different, right? People have been activated on it. But is QAnon much different than UFO belief? Like people have died because they believed in UFOs.
And maybe it's more of a personal or situational thing. Like if, again, with like QAnon, if it's your parents, you know, and you can't have conversations with them without that becoming something that's an issue. If it's like you're like losing close friends because of it. I mean, maybe that's more of the case. I think with believers, I don't necessarily know if that's like I've stopped talking to people because they've been so adamant about their belief in something.
Sure. I mean, I guess it's a difference, right? And for sure, I think that QAnon is more virulent and dangerous than UFO beliefs. Like don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying, from the point of view of this argument or whatever, like, is that the distinction then? Is the distinction that we have to make then the tendency towards harm? So like, if someone believes in QAnon and it starts to negatively impact their lives, then you need to step in and try to help them. But again, it just seems
and not
like
even help them, but like question. I would say like true skepticism is questioning. Like I'm going to ask questions.
Yeah.
Like, why is this? So where did you get this idea from?
Well, okay, but
or where is this from?
But let's take the example of like the terrorism example, right? If you knew that 20 years ago you could have stopped a terrorist attack by simply debunking, or, and then I think there's another operational argument here, which is debunking doesn't fucking work. It does not convince anybody of anything. It just makes believers believe harder.
Well, yeah, but do you think that that's, I mean, we did discuss this on our last episode about debunking just puts you further down the rabbit hole. But where's the bottom of the rabbit hole with that? When can you finally, do you think that there's a point with conspiracy theorists or with people that believe in these things? And I'll just go with conspiracy theory now, just because it's kind of an easy target. Like that they're finally like, no, I don't. Like, where does it break?
I honestly don't know. Like I used to think, and that's the reason why I'm thinking about this, listeners, is frankly, I'm going through kind of a come to Jesus moment, or like a crisis of faith, I guess. When I started this, or when I started getting involved in this, I really thought that engaging with people constructively and pointing out cases where I thought people were being taken advantage of was a good thing. And would help, would like help people. And it's kind of worked, I think, to some extent. We've had listeners come and say like, hey, your show is really cool. You made me change my mind on this, whatever. Like that has happened to us. But
then we've had listeners that are like, the woman swears too much.
Right. I don't like the woman. She has too high a voice.
She's shrill.
She's shrill. Yeah.
She's shrill
but
and angry.
But on the other hand, though, sometimes it makes me wonder, like, are you just, by engaging with these communities, are you almost just like throwing tinder or making sparks? Right? Because like, let's take the terrorism example, the terrorism thing, for example. If you knew 100% that you could go to a local community and by showing them that, the leader of this terrorist sect was like, I don't know, turns out he was hanging out in Pakistan with a buttload of porn, like bin Laden, for listeners who didn't get the joke, if you could do that and be sure that it would change people's opinion and stop a terrorist cell from growing that would go on to kill like thousands of people, I think most people would say, well, I would do it. Right? That's the right thing to do. That's a good thing to do.
Yes.
But if you going there and preaching a different faith or anti-terrorism or whatever just makes like it can convert some people, but mostly it just makes people like hardened or more hardened in their belief.
Well, that's because I don't think that showing them that their leader is false is necessarily the unlock, right? Like I don't think, because it's not about the leader, it's about them.
See, but,
right?
that's the interesting thing though, right? Is as far as I can tell, and as far as everything I've read and whatever, the only way to actually get people to change their mind is to let them change their mind.
Right.
You just give them the space and the time to do it.
Right.
The problem with that is it means that engagement with communities like this, like basically you just need to let the scab heal in a way, right? You just need to let the wound heal. Like, and that sounds like, again,
but I think you can ask them questions. Like, I think you can give them prompts in which to think about stuff, which again, this kind of goes back to like deprogramming on cults. Like, I think and there's a relatively recent example of a troll that went after Sarah Silverman, and he believed in all of these very radical right-wing ideas. And he began to have this sort of dialogue with Sarah Silverman, the comedian, right? Who I don't necessarily find fun. She's not my favorite, but I was like, wow, this is a really weird example. Like this person who clearly was very adversarial to her. And she basically like talked to him, asked him questions, and he I hate to say broke, but he literally questioned his own beliefs and saw through some logic and changed his mind.
Well, and so those have been the only cases where honestly I feel like we know about successful. It. But no, but even like our show, right? Like I think those are the cases where we have been successful, is where people kind of get past like the straw men or straw women or whatever. We're just these evil skeptical debunkers or whatever. And then we just talk to people. But again, it's a very like, where it's like a very colonial almost attitude. It's like going, we're Christian missionaries going to talk to the savages, right? Like it's a very like fucked up view, I feel like almost. And that's why I'm having this like weird, moment, I guess, is because I don't know, man. Like, I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm not even sure if an answer is ethical. Like, I don't even know if, I used to have this I used to have a very sort of, I guess, what's the word? One of my buddies who I was in philosophy with just texted me the other day and asked me if I still held this view about UFOs. And it's kind of funny. And I can't think of the word he used, but it was pretty good. Almost like I guess I've always had kind of a very dialectical view of arguments or thoughts or whatever, where, and again, kind of like from Dawkins, like meme or memetics or whatever, or even genetics, where memetics kind of borrows a lot of ideas from or whatever. And whether or not you think memetics or whatever is real or not, it's kind of neither here nor there for this argument. But basically, I've kind of always had this view since undergrad, since being introduced to this, that like moral thoughts or just general thoughts that people have or communities have are kind of always warring with each other. And the ones that are the most advantageous and advantageous might not mean like genetically advantageous or whatever. It might just be like makes the most money or like is the most entertaining or is the most funny or whatever. Yeah. Those ideas are the ones that kind of win out. Right. And so I've always kind of had that view. And so from that view, then one type of thinking or one type of theory that is very effective is the scientific worldview, right? It's gotten us technology. It's kind of promoted our society. It's whatever, but it's
prevailed. But
maybe that isn't actually like, maybe that's just a mistake. Like maybe it prevailing or us thinking it prevailed is just like bullshit. Like maybe it just prevailed because it gave us like technology or whatever. But once you have enough technology, you go back. Or maybe another type of theory works. Or maybe, we're always just kind of, because I honestly don't think that like the scientific worldview has one actually. Most people don't consider themselves or don't, aren't atheists, aren't strict materialists, aren't whatever. And so it's kind of like a very, I think, this idea of there being like holy warriors for both sides, that you can have like skeptical warriors and believer warriors and ghost hunters and Bigfoot warriors and whatever, these people fighting for all their ideas. Like, I still kind of think that. I do still think that, but it's sort of, I guess I am less sure than ever of what it actually is that makes an idea a good idea, or a thought a beneficial thought, or whatever. Because again,
Well, I think so. I think what makes a thought a good thought is that you are willing to question that belief in genuine, just like you're doing now, right? I mean, you might come back with doubt. Like, I think doubt actually is what is imperative to, like, and we've discussed this before, but it's imperative to, like, to being a skeptic. It's not just doubt in other things or cynicism. It's doubt, in a healthy amount of doubt in my own beliefs. Like, do I believe something because of this, or is it because of that? Or is it, is it right? Like, I think that is what actually makes it good, because people who don't question themselves or question others and just have this sort of moral imperative that's unchanging are the ones that are easily weaponized. They're the ones that are easily manipulated, because there's no point that they ever reflect.
Yeah. And so then we kind of end up, I think, at the crux of it, which is maybe the answer here isn't, again, teaching people what to think, but teaching people how to think. Right?
Yeah.
Teaching people rational,
right.
Not even necessarily rationalism, but teaching people how to pick apart arguments,
that you're not always going to be right.
Yeah.
And being right isn't always the answer, right? Like, I know a lot of people that I work with now that are very, very afraid to say that they've made a mistake, right? I think, and this is something that as you get older, you get into any kind of a job, you do not want to say, hey, we just spent the last 6 months and we got nothing out. Like, we just made a huge error on this. And I think that kind of thinking is one of those things that you're so afraid to admit what is perceived to be a failure that you don't learn from what you're actually supposed to see. You know what I mean? It's like, if something fails, again, it's like the scientific method. If something fails, there's a good reason for it. And you should talk about it and look at it and evaluate it without judgment or fear. And I think that that's one of the things that kind of gets beat out of everybody at a very early age, is you don't admit weakness, and you don't admit that you failed at something or that you're wrong. Like, I work with someone who I consider really, really, really smart, super perceptive. They pick things up super fast. They're very nimble-minded, but they never, ever say they were wrong. And you can see where it's held them back kind of on their overall arc of anything. Because it's like, they're so afraid to have that moment of being wrong that they've never been fired from a job. They've never royally fucked something up, or, but they've never been able to come back and say, okay, well, maybe this didn't work because I wasn't the right person for it. I wasn't the right fit. I was fighting against myself to try and achieve something that I don't even really want, but I'm so afraid to fail, even if it could teach me something. Mm-hmm. My 2 cents.
No,
because I have been fired from a shitload of jobs, people. Let me tell you, at least I can count at least 7. At least 7, and look at me. I'm out here kicking.
Marie, I'm not sure we can end on a better note than that. Let's wrap it up. Listeners, thank you for hearing us ramble about this topic here today. I think it's an important one, especially after our last episode on disclosure. Might even release these as like 2 episodes together. Just like on the same day or something, because I think they go together, and it's an important question. I think, again, it's like, I don't know. I think doubt and being able to admit you're wrong and being humble about your own beliefs, like Marie said, curious. That's the important thing. And curious, 100%.
Being curious, yeah.
All right, dear listeners, we love you all.
Big hugs.
Big hugs. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at MadScientistPod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram,
and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see. If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Because we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.
Jake.
So good.
That's my theme song for Jake.
Jake.
Sorry, Jake. Jake.
So,
Oh man, it's like
boy.
Lin-Manuel.